Hello and welcome to Wccftech Interviews. My name is Dave and you are tuning into another wonderful episode, this time with Andy Robinson, who you might know from VGC.com, but he has been doing a lot of things in the games industry for a very long time. Andy?
Hi, VGC.com will take you to a horrible holding page. So try VGC.news or videogameschronicle.com.
That's good to know. Today we're just going to be talking about Andy's background, the industry, and all the things he's done, because I think it's a very interesting perspective and you might get a lot of valuable insight from it. So to kick things off, Andy, please tell us, how did you get started into the games media industry to start with?
Oh, wow. So I guess it's a similar story to a lot of people who work in the games media, really, which is I just kind of, started off kind of doing fanzines and stuff like that. So the equivalent to kind of starting my own YouTube channel 20 years ago would have been just, starting up, fan websites and, that sort of thing. And then kind of eventually ended up contributing to some bigger sites, just on a kind of a freebie basis, just to kind of get your foot in the door, which is kind of frowned upon. But it was worked out in my sense, that it kind of got my foot in the door to meet various people and to get to understand the industry, the kind of the media industry and how everything works. And so I kind of did that like on a freebie basis between the age of, I want to say like 16 to 18. It's all I wanted to do really was games media. Growing up were like, magazine editors and stuff. That was always what I wanted to do. I went and kind of got myself in a ton of debt to go and do like a journalism degree, which I never ended up finishing, because he got me a job, which was the end goal. I took like my 18th birthday present was like a flight to E3, and I'd kind of like done a couple of E3s before I even got employed. Like I was just determined to get my foot in the door, really. But the kind of the real kind of clincher for me was the opportunity to do some work experience at CVG, the kind of the website, previously the magazine, at Future Publishing, and it's always an unwritten rule, really. I don't know what it's like so much these days because I've not kind of given out work experience for a good couple of years, and I've not worked for a big corporation for a big couple of years either. But certainly at the time, the unwritten rule was like, well, if you're giving someone work experience, it's with an eye to a job, right? Like, you're kind of training them up, helping them out, and giving them advice of how to perhaps get a position within your company or maybe even someone else's. And I do think you do see that kind of externally now. They're like Eurogamer are really good at like kind of doing an intern scheme. I think that's paid, and from what I've seen, most people who do that kind of end up in full-time positions. So I did that for, maybe it was even like a month. It was like Xbox 360 launch month, right? So I'd been doing it on a freebie basis for a couple of years, right? So I've been around the industry, I've been reviewing stuff and blah, blah. But it was still a big step up to suddenly be in a big office, right? And you don't get this anymore. Like, it's such a unique time and place to be in and around the games media, because at Future Publishing at the time, we had virtually a whole floor of this like, 7-story building full of games publications. I'd be sat with CVG, and then next to us would be like Official Nintendo Magazine and PC Zone, a PSW. We'd have Official Xbox Magazine in the corner, Official Xbox 360 at the time as well, because there was a brief time when I started, they were kind of tailing off Official Xbox One. I'm sure I've missed a publication. They're going to be, well, they won't be pissed off because they won't listen, but I'm sure I've missed some. But do you know what I mean? Like, working on that whole floor of all these people, and there would be editors of old magazines that I used to read as a kid, like just walking around. And I guess a big part of one of the big things that was slapped into me in those early days was like, stop being a fanboy, like this is a real profession. So I wasn't exactly like gawping over it, but it was still pretty cool, in hindsight. So yeah, no, it was a really amazing time to be around it. Like, as the 360 was coming out, like this was maybe, I want to say I was doing work experience maybe like late October time, maybe it was probably early October, late September, and they already had 360 units. Like reviewing stuff for the magazines, had like a long lead time, and me, kind of Billy Big Bollocks, from doing it as a freebie. I had a dev kit at home as well, like from my the kind of the free work that I was doing for a site called Kikizo, which used to be a bigger site called GamerWeb. They don't exist anymore, but the people involved are like kind of quite senior at IGN and places like that. It was quite a big site in the UK at the time. So I it was an exciting time to be around, and I got given the job full time. I ended up getting a half and half role on CVG and PC Zone. The PC Zone section only lasted for about 6 months, but it was really great to work with them. Like, fantastic team, fantastic learning experience to be in and around a magazine as well for a period of my career. And I got the job on the day of the Xbox 360 launch party. So it's like the day before it came out. I think it was the 5th of December. So yeah, no, those were good days, good times.
Yeah, I can imagine. I got into games media like basically at the beginning of the Wii U generation and PS4 and stuff. So mine's far more recent. Yeah, I know, right? Bad time to be a Nintendo fan.
Do you know what, man? Like, everyone thinks that the previous generation of writers like got in at a better time. Like, even when I came in, then you were hearing stories from the people who were in like during the real early PS2, like PS1 days, and just the caliber of access would be loads better. The press trip sounded amazing. The kind of the people you got to interview, the games you got to cover, just sounded so much better, and it seems to always be the case. Like, whenever someone comes in, it always feels like, the guys that they're speaking to, more senior guys, had it better. But I guess maybe it's just nostalgia. But certainly, obviously, there's the trend of the media landscape changing. I mean, certainly, I got the tail end of magazines, I guess, not the real tail end, but it was certainly waning. And the guys who would have been in before me in the late 90s, magazines were like the be all and end all then, right? Like, official PlayStation had like a circulation of hundreds of thousands. In the UK alone, then they were breaking legitimate world exclusives. They'd have people queuing around the block to be on their cover, to be featured in the magazine. Whereas that's just not the case now, because things have moved on, things have changed.
Yeah, no, I completely understand that. Yes, once upon a time. Although I gotta admit, part of me is glad that I managed to skip the booth babe era. Just sounds a little uncomfortable. But do tell me, what was it like transitioning from games media into games development when you went to work with Playtonic?
That's a good question. Tough, and tough, but at the same time, I don't know. Some bits were tough, some bits were easy. That's not the most nuanced answer, I know, but it's the biggest thing is it's a big change of pace, right? And the biggest thing for me was that I didn't make the change when I'd just been doing games journalism for a bit. I'd been doing it for like 10 years by that point, and I felt like I was good at it. And it really did feel like, to me, like just binning off everything that I'd learned in my career for one respect, and starting again. I mean, obviously, there's a ton of stuff that you take over, learning processes that are really, really useful, super useful on that side. There's a reason that practically everyone who works in the games media ends up going development side or publishing side, because the skills you learn are valuable to them. The hardest thing was how much of a change of pace it was. When you're working in, certainly, I consider myself a news journalist, right? I mean, I've always worked in and around news, in news teams focused on news. your satisfaction, your job satisfaction, your entire motivation, your function is built around the next publish, right? I'm sure you know this. Even right now, I'm just constantly thinking, what's my next publish? What's my next exclusive I'm working on? What features have I got coming up? It's all your entire, fulfillment through the job is your next publish. And then suddenly you're going to work on a game and it's like 1, 2 to 3 year publish. The change of pace is brutal, absolutely brutal. I remember also I was lucky enough to work with like really, really experienced guys who could give like a lot of really good insight. And I remember them saying to me at the start that, it's like a roller coaster. Sometimes you're going to be doing nothing practically, and then other times you're going to be absolutely swamped. And it's true. There were times when I was, struggling to find work for myself, because really, like a on-staff writer for like one indie game is not really a full-time job. Like most of those positions will be contracted or freelance, I imagine. So I was kind of doing a couple of jobs, like doing a bit of PR and community management, etc., even a bit of design by the end. And there will be times when I've never been so stressed in my life, right? Like at that first E3 we exhibited the game, Yooka-Laylee, the first one. That was definitely the most stressed I'd ever been professionally, like easy. Like, just like being sick through stress sometimes. Like, I was, arranging the journalist interviews, cutting the trailer, capturing the screenshots, like creating everything to do with comms, the PR answers, what we're going to show, what the marketing beats are. I even made the bloody demo, right? Like, built it. I mean, obviously, I didn't do that side on my own, but I mean, like structuring the flow of the demo and what needed to be in it and what needed to be taken out and stuff like that. I've never been so stressed in my life doing that. But I mean, certainly coming from the media and going into games, you take a lot of skills with you that are very valuable. I mean, I would say probably for Playtonic, it was useful to them to have my kind of media contacts from a PR point of view. Like it was very straightforward to, phone up Edge magazine and say, look, we want to announce our game in Edge, which we did twice. We had 2 covers on OPM. We're on IGN first constantly, because I knew all those people. So that was incredibly useful, I imagine, for them. And, on the development side, it was super useful for me to come back now having real knowledge of how games are made, because, I think a lot of people probably are naive, and that's not necessarily a criticism, because, you don't really know how the sauce is made until you go in the kitchen, right? Necessarily. I mean, I've always been around game developers and game development, been around studios, etc., but until you spend 6 months watching a white box, slowly change and then get put in the bin and then built again and then get put in the bin again, and then, the game not be working at all until the last month before release. And you don't really realize just how, chaotic, game development is. And, stuff like, I mean, I saw a quote recently that absolutely nailed it. I can't remember who the developer was, but he was saying like about how this game that he worked on, he saw his fingerprints on everything and yet nothing. And that is kind of it. Like you've got this team of so many disparate disciplines, right? All following an overarching direction, but ultimately they need to work autonomously. You just can't make a game with everyone told exactly what to do by a book. Everyone's lumping in content, changing things every single day right up until the end, until hopefully you end up with something that works. Because it's mad. It's like building a house off plan. You've got all, sculptors and, painters and builders and all the rest of it, and you've got a rough idea. Someone's shown you a picture of, the roof should be like this, and the floor should be like this, and you're just all going on separately, and you have no idea what the house is going to be like until right at the end.
Yeah. what an adventure. And yeah, it's like when you said about the turnover rate, like you have to wait 3 years to see any real feedback or anything from what you're doing. My girlfriend works in science, and she was basically complaining about how some people research something for their entire lifetime and then die before they see the results come to fruition. So, so it could be worse. It could be worse. But what was it like?
I guess it is worse in AAA, whereas these
Yeah.
days they were releasing like one game every like
Yes.
7 years, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And who knows how many cancelled projects in between all that. But yeah, what was it like seeing a giant like CVG close only to bring VGC back into games media's forefront?
Wow, that's two very different questions.
Sorry. Take them as you will.
I'll take them one at a time, shall I?
Yeah.
CVG closing, yeah, that sucked. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that sucked. Obviously, it was shit. It was shit for everyone involved. My looking back, I just hope that everyone on the team is like kind of worked out okay, and I think they have. Like they've all gone on to like really good positions. Like that's when I look back and I think of that, I feel bad for my team really that happened. I guess that I should feel some responsibility in some way that I should it's my responsibility to look out for them, even though it was nothing to do with me or any of us. It was a cold-hearted business decision. They wanted to downsize the company. We had this battle, right? Like I was at Future for 10 years. We constantly had this battle of like it's a public company, right? So it's proper suits at the top who some of them had come from completely different industries. They certainly don't know anything about the games industry. Any of them didn't, because obviously Future wasn't just games publications. There were lots of different publications covering lots of, it's like a hobbyist sort of company really. It's like bikes and DJing and tech and film and stuff like that. Yeah, like they were needed to downsize the company, and there was always this argument right from the start that came from the top, very top, of why do we have two games websites? They just didn't understand. Like we got CVG, which was bigger in the UK, and we got Games Radar, which was Games Radar came from. You got to be old school as hell to remember this. It was a site called Daily Radar, which I think might have been Ziff Davis. I might be making that up. But Daily Radar was one of the bigger US sites, like sort of circa 2000, that sort of time. It would have been like IGN and GameSpot and like Daily Radar. And Future acquired Daily Radar and sort of relaunched it as Games Radar in the mid 2000s. So it was very US based. In fact, again, I might be making some of this up because this is a long time ago. I think they even sort of like expanded or it was, the US office. The US office was quite, linked to the fact that Games Radar was a thing. It took them a long time to find Games Radar's identity. Long time. Like, they were trying to, find its niche and do something different. And whereas in the CVG in the UK, we were sort of more of a traditional publication going for like a core, ultra core audience. And by that time, 2013, 2014, CVG was bigger than it had ever been. Personally, I'd say the editorial was better than it'd ever been. Our team was awesome. I even look back at some of the stuff now, and it's just the coverage is excellent. Like if CVG was still around now with that coverage that we had, not just from the London team, but also the Bath team as well, we would be one of the best sites going, full stop. I think like the editorial was just fantastic in my opinion, and not talking about my stuff. I'm talking about all of the teams who kind of contributed to that. But ultimately, it's, the company got itself into a bind, and it was always coming, right? It was always coming. It always felt that Future was like quite naive into certain extents, and like a lot of public companies, right? Like Future's problem was always that all it cared about was next year. It didn't care about 5 years' time. All it gave a shit about was, what can we do to make the graph go up by the end of this fiscal year? That's all they cared about. So whenever the very rare times that you had, big sweeping conversations about the direction of the site, you just knew that it's all bollocks, because, this is, everything's going to change in 6 months' time when some other shiny thing comes along. The company was increasingly in debt. It was always paying it off. It was going down, but throughout my time there, the company was always in this debt. Obviously, we'd kind of gone through the recession in kind of the late 2000s as well. Magazine industry was only getting smaller. So it always felt like it was coming, right? And the company bet big time on iPad editions. Do you remember when the iPad first came out and it was like this really exciting thing? And people were like, oh, we can put magazines on it. And people read magazines on an iPad. And Future were like making a mint from that for a brief period, I think. And it all just came crashing down. And, like any big kind of company, when that happens, it's, the restructuring is like, has to be brutal. It can't be personal. So we moved into an office, or Future moved into an office that was like an absolute fraction of the size of this 6-7 floor, Baker Street kind of block that we were in. You just couldn't fit, even just logistically, the amount of money they'd saved just from doing that, right? You just couldn't fit all those people in. So a lot of publications were moved to Bath from London. And I'd say, by the way, that they had it worse off than we did. At least CBG was shut. I mean, I'm sat here with, a thankfully, growing, successful publication, fueled by a lot of the fantastic people in not just the industry, but also in the audience who loved CBG and wanted to see it continue, kind of thanks to that closure almost. Whereas there are a lot of people who, got the bad end of the brunt there and that aren't talked about as much because their publications were just moved to Bath. Like, to the public, to your NeoGAF and your Reset era, OXM still going, or it was still going until recently. But, that team were there for as long as I was there. And they got told one day, by the way, all your jobs are getting moved to Bath. And it's like, right, so we're all out of a job. And, no one's really going to know about it, because to the public eye, OXM still turns up on the shelves. So I do love digressing. I've lost my train of thought now, really. So yeah, no, it was what it was. The most disappointing thing about CBG was that we had quite a few offers to buy us, because we were doing great at the time. We really were. Like that editorial team was fantastic, in London and in Bath. You look at where those guys are now; they're all in like top places, because they're excellent journalists, all of them. I loved working with them. Traffic, we'd grown 200% like in 2 years while I was editor. We were looking to expand into the US. I mean, I think about a month before they announced they were closing us, I had an email from the CEO like saying how fantastic we were doing, and we were the company were proud of us, and blah blah blah. So the disappointing thing for me, I guess, because the fact that it closed is just business, right? It is what it is, and I think I learned a valuable lesson, and I guess probably I can't speak for the other guys, but it taught me a valuable lesson about sort of looking after yourself a bit, because I spent 10 years being super loyal to Future. Myself, my own personal gain would kind of come second to the brand. It was all about CBG. Everything I do would be CBG. And you kind of learn a lesson then that don't be stupid. Like, you work for a big company, they can lay you off tomorrow. Make sure you look after yourself, as well as your brand. And that was the frustrating thing, that all of those offers for CVG, they were just told, no, we don't want to sell because we don't want to create a rival. We're doing fantastic, and our stuff was like essentially deleted off the internet. One of the first publications alongside like One Up, I guess, to have our work like erased, because they didn't want to create a rival, which is, shit, to be honest. It's business, but that's shit. We had loads of people who were, ready to do this, but I guess it worked out because I did it myself. 5 years later. So that's a bit longer than you probably thought. That's the CVG side. VGC, VGC's it's been beyond all my expectations. It's been fantastic. The support we've received has been, humbling. It's so cliched, right? But it is one of those where it's like, if you'd have told me that we'd be here, with all of the backing that we have, part of Gaming Network, with the massive kind of traffic growth we've had, all of the access that we've been given and the support, it is beyond my wildest expectations. It really is. It's been fantastic, and I hope it keeps going.
Yeah, I'm sure it will. You're doing amazing. And on that note, what would you attribute the success of VGC to? I think you've already mentioned the people that wind it back and the quality of the writers you have now.
I think we identified a gap in the market. Since CVG left a big gap of kind of for news reporting in games. There's a lot of people doing good news reporting, but it's not only did CVG leave a gap, but there are a lot of publications that ended up closing or downsizing in the following subsequent years as well. I certainly spoke to tons and tons of people before I did it. Is this the sort of thing you'd like to see? A news site doing proper news, original reporting. And the response was overwhelmingly yes. But you're always guessing before you kind of launch a business, really. And you end up evolving it based on data, right? It's just natural. It's kind of been the case of like, if you make original content, then people will come. There's just, I don't want to sound like I'm being down on the games media, because there's so many people doing lots of great stuff. But there are lots of disparate disciplines in journalism, right? And it's kind of heavily weighted in certain areas right now. There are not a huge amount of people doing great news. Like, Eurogamer do great news, and also you've got people like, Venture B and Jason Schreier's a great journalist, and there are a few others who I'm big fans of as well, including you guys. You guys do really good news, actually.
Thank you.
You're one of my favorites. And I'm not just saying that either.
Our games editor, Alessio, is a news hound. He will scan every interview and every corner of the web.
He's really good, mate. He really is. And it is just kind of the case that there are not a lot of people doing that. There really aren't. Like, and part of the reason for that, I guess the conversation comes full circle a little bit, is that, the pay's, it's well documented that the pay's never great in journalism, full stop, not just games, especially compared to what you can go and do, right? Like, I went and did PR for like 2 months or something, 3 months after I left CVG, and like, almost doubled my salary. And that's just a constant. Throughout the time in the early days where I was on CVG, it was just a sort of accepted thing that you did journalism for a bit and then you went and became a PR. And that was constant, right? Like practically everyone went into PR. Practically everyone. And if you go back, I mean, I saw a thing recently, excuse me, David Doak, the game designer, put up a like old roll call sheet for a Time Splitters 2 press event.
Mm.
and he tagged like all the journalists on there that were on it. Like it was like, oh, EGM and Game Informer and blah blah. And I clicked through to all of them, and they're all like, Bungie, Insomniac, Xbox. They've all
Hmm.
gone into publishing, right? Because that is what you do. If you want to be a grown up and have kids and a mortgage, it's not easy there aren't many jobs in the games media that are going to pay that salary, right?
Yeah.
And those jobs are taken, and those guys are not moving, for very often. There are
Yeah.
only so many jobs, right? Like, I mean, certainly I don't think I would be in games media now if I was relying on someone else to hire me.
Hmm.
Like, I just wouldn't, because there are like probably 5 jobs, and there are people in them, as I said. So the point I guess I'm trying to make is that the most experienced people tend to move on.
Mm.
So I don't think I'm more special or particularly more skilled than anyone else, any of my peers. It's just I'm more experienced than most people, I guess.
Mm.
Um, so you stick around long enough, then you're going to have that advantage, I guess. I mean, there are lots of experienced people out there as well who I'm big fans of. It's just there aren't many of us, and there never was.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, usually when people ask me what I do and I tell them I'm in games media, um, basically what I explain to them is that it's a lot of fun. It can't really be a permanent thing though, because like you said, if you want to be a grown up, it's not so easy. Um, and they're always surprised by that because they expect I'm getting like a streamer salary of like millions a year or something. And we're like, no, no, that's not how it works. Anyway, we've seen multiple exclusives come from VGC, like months before their official announcements. Of course, I'm pretty sure you had a good exclusive interview on the Wonderful 101 remastered and Mario 3D All Stars. You were months ahead of that, of course. So I'm not going to ask you who your sources are, obviously, but how do you go about making these industry connections that allow you to get these exclusives?
It's just life, really, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
that is the life of a news journalist, is socializing
Mm-hmm.
and networking. It's as simple as that. I mean, people outside the circle might think that it's some complex, professional thing. It's just networking. It's just as simple as that. Like, if you're around long enough, you make some friends who end up going into different positions at different places. Simple as that.
Yeah, that's basically the answer I expected, to be honest. But yeah, my next question is: would you say that these sources and relationships are essential to lending legitimacy to a site like VGC?
They're part of it. They're part of it. Running a publication is tricky, right? It involves a lot of different hats. Not to mention the fact that these days I'm running a business and a publication, which makes it even more complicated. But in terms of building a publication itself, you've got to set your stall out, be authoritative, make it clear and shout to people why you're different and why you're important and why they should care.
Mm-hmm.
That is establishing a brand. Obviously exclusive editorial is essential. So not being derivative, doing something different. But also when you're running a publication and when you're running an editor, it's you need to, in my opinion, it's always been about, your job as an editor is about three kind of columns. You've got to build kind of engagement, great editorial with your audience.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to generate traffic to pay the bills, and the third column of that is obviously being aware of the commercial elements,
Mm-hmm.
which is less important these days. But when you're working at a big publisher like Future, you also need to be aware that there's certain things you need to do to make sure that the lights are kept on, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you concentrate on any 3 of those too much, I think that's where you end up with, like somebody that's a bit shit, really. I think obviously you have some sites that concentrate just way too much on got to get the traffic in, and then the audience thinks they're shit.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got other publications who concentrate way too much on creating great editorial that their audience is going to engage with, and people love them, but they're not very big websites, or certainly not as big as they should be. The commercial thing, I think, is just like something that just comes naturally as a side to part of those. Like, you've just got to be, there's not much room in the professional space for like renegades, right? Like, you've got to be aware that there's certain, you've got to embed this video player, and obviously you've got to be aware of like certain advertising requirements, not within the editorial, I mean like subsequent around that, just because as the editor of a website, that business better than anyone, or you should. So if you've got a team of ads people that are selling your site, the person with the best insight is you. Like, this is the sort of thing that I think would do well. This is the sort of kind of partnerships that would be a good fit for us. That sort of thing. Sorry, I'm waffling.
No, that's exactly what you're here for, to be honest. So what are the biggest struggles that you're finding in growing a site like VGC?
Wow. Oh, that's a good question. Biggest struggles. The biggest struggle is building a tangible, real audience of people who come back every day. It took us about a year before we started to get the foundations of that, like people who comment every day, people who share your stuff on social media every day. I mean, traffic is easy compared to building a real audience. Anyone can get guys to stumble in across Google, but the real value, in my opinion, is that real audience who are, you're going to check every day, the direct visitors who kind of is part of their routine.
Sure.
That's the hardest bit, because you can't cheat that, right? You can't cheat people to make people want to come and read your site every day. They're only going to do that if what you're offering is of value, and you're only going to prove that over a period of time. I mean, it took at least a year before we were at that stage. It was almost like clockwork, on the year point, April, May this year, everything just exploded upwards, because suddenly you had a real audience, right? Like, I mean, we were breaking exclusives, last year, lots of exclusives all the time. But they wouldn't have the same impact as if I was to do them now, because now if I put an exclusive up, it gets shared immediately, because it's like, oh, these guys are CVG. Not CVG. That's the first time in a year and a half I've called VGC CVG.
Oh my God.
I've like had pride in the fact that I've not called it CVG. It's because we've been going on about CVG.
Yeah, I've been flipping you back and forth. I did it to you.
If I put an original story up now, it will get shared immediately by the right people, and amplified, because we've built up a track record. The audience know who we are, right? It's helped, like we're verified on Twitter and stuff like that, which helps as well. That's not something that happened overnight at all. That took a long time to build up. We break exclusives last year and even early this year, and a lot of the response would be, who are these guys? And it'd be like, another site would report it, our own work,
and then it explode
according to it, and they go, oh, but Eurogamer says it's real, or this guy on Twitter who's got 20,000 followers, he retweeted it. So it's like, that guy on Twitter with 20,000 followers is more credible than but that just is how it is, right? I'll give you an example. The biggest one, which was the first time that it was really like quite frustrating for us. One of the big stories we did earlier this year that gets forgotten is we broke an exclusive about Call of Duty Warzone before it was announced. It's a free-to-play battle royale game. It's coming out in March. It's got this and that. And it was absolutely nail on, one of the most nail on stories I've ever done. Like, we even had practically to the day, this is when it's coming out and this is what it's going to have. And it did big traffic, but the response from the Call of Duty community was like, bullshit. Who are these guys? Like, nonsense. If you go and read some of the comments now, it's amazing. Like how they'd, they just completely dismissed us. And in fact, one of the I'm quite good friends with friends, like become quite good. Well, one of my good contacts now is like a moderator for one of the big kind of Call of Duty Reddits, and we were banned. He banned us like for this because he's like, this is nonsense. You know, you're banned for making stuff up.
Yeah.
And it's like a month later when it's real, it's like, all right, you guys are legit. Like, you know, come back.
Yeah.
But it's that sort of thing that was annoying, right? Like when, because you know, I talked. You asked me before, like, what was the most important things about a publication? Like, you put original stories and put a lot of work into breaking exclusives. When people just won't believe you, you know, for nothing really, just because they've not heard of you, yeah, that's frustrating. I mean, it doesn't really happen anymore now, because I think the most important thing was making sure that the right people knew who we are. Like influencers and stuff like that was very useful, because certainly all the publications knew who I was in the early days. They were very supportive, actually, and I have to, you know, thank all those guys. I mean, every site going, really, your IGNs, GameSpots, Eurogamers, you know, etc., would all cover our stuff, but we weren't really credible until you get shared by, you know, a lot of the big players on social media space, because I guess they're reaching a different audience as well, right? Because that's another thing that I've learned in coming back to the VGC compared to CBG, is that, you know, obviously the content creator space is a lot bigger than it was then, and there's just no crossover practically. There's just no crossover. You know, I used to get a little bit frustrated maybe a year ago when it's like, how comes these YouTubers like don't link to us and what have you? And then we started doing video shows on YouTube, and you know, people told me this obviously, but it became super apparent when we started doing ourselves. And it's like, there really is no crossover. Like on YouTube, they don't really care if you're the source or you know you did it best or you did it first. It's they have their regular personalities who they go to, and that's that really. And I think that's probably a lot of where that Call of Duty stuff came from as well, because it's like they're not like dudes who sit and read games websites all day. They just play Call of Duty. They're probably more into esports than they are into following games news as a whole. So we were just a complete enigma to them. It's like, who are these guys? We have our regular outlets who we go to, who break all the Call of Duty stories in our kind of Call of Duty bubble. So if we've not heard of you, then you're probably making it up, and it probably is a problem for them in their community a lot of the time, right? People just making stuff up all the time.
Now I have to ask, what are the biggest lessons you've learnt in your time in both games media and working with developers, in a nutshell?
Wow, that is a broad question.
No, in a nutshell. You gotta condense it if you can.
My biggest lessons?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I feel like a Chinese philosopher, just the odd few wise words.
Well, you know, in my particular discipline, covering news, I've learned a whole ton about, you know, sourcing, right? Like which sources to, you know, how to vouch your stories correctly. And that came through pain in the early days, right? So, you know, I get sent stories all the time now, as I'm sure other news writers do as well, where you're sort of like, yeah, that doesn't look credible, you know, or even if it is, I'm not reporting it until I can get a second source, because your reputation is everything, right? Like if we put up a big story that ends up being absolute bollocks, then that's us done. It's not worth it, you know, for a bit of traffic. So that would be my biggest lesson in the games news space. Game development, everything's easy with hindsight in game development. I'd say the biggest lesson I learned that I didn't know before, that probably the game playing community could do with knowing, is that game developers know which parts of their game are shit. They're not stupid, you know. It's been said before, games aren't released, they're abandoned. You have a finite budget and a finite, you know, amount of resources in terms of your team size, etc. So it's the whole kind of process of game development is about compromise. You only have so much time and resource, and you decide where you're going to put that. So when reviews come out and they're like, oh, but this isn't great, and I don't know why they've done this, and I mean, the quality of reviews is a lot better today, but certainly, 10, 20 years ago, it wouldn't have been surprised to see stuff like, what did they think they were doing? Why on earth would they do this? Are they mad? It's like, no, they know exactly what they're doing. They know it's shit. It's not been put out like when they think this is brilliant, they'll love this. They put it out in spite of that. That was a bit of an eye opener. It probably shouldn't have been, really. But that was something that surprised me, certainly.
Well, I think that's all of my questions. Thank you so much for joining me. Do tell us, where can we find you, and where can we go to bookmark VGC?
I'm on Twitter, Andy Playtonic, still one word, and VGC. You can get us at videogameschronicle.com, or if you can't be asked to write that, you can go to vgc.news.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining me, and thank you for everyone for watching and listening at home. Please do remember to subscribe and keep watching for more interesting interviews in games media and the gaming communities on WCCF Tech Interviews.